Warning, the following ZipRecruiter radio spot you are about to hear is going to be filled with F-words.
When you're hiring, we at ZipRecruiter know you can feel frustrated, forlorn even, like your efforts are futile, and you can spend a fortune trying to find fabulous people, only to get flooded with candidates who are just fine. Fortunately, ZipRecruiter figured out how to fix all that. And right now, you can try ZipRecruiter for free at ZipRecruiter.com/zip. With ZipRecruiter, you can forget your frustrations because we find the right people for your roles fast, which is our absolute favorite F word. In fact, 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day.
Fantastic!
So, whether you need to hire 4, 40, or 400 people, get ready to meet first-rate talent. Just go to ZipRecruiter.com/zip to try ZipRecruiter for free. Don't forget, that's ZipRecruiter.com/zip. Finally, that's ZipRecruiter.com/zip.
Love is in the air. Chocolates, roses, and heart-shaped cards fill store shelves. Everywhere you look, people are celebrating romance, passion, and affection. Valentine's Day is perhaps the most romantic day of the year. Or is it? What if I told you that Valentine's Day wasn't always about love, that beneath the sweet messages and candlelit dinners, there lies a history filled with blood rituals, ancient gods, and dark traditions, that the origins of this holiday trace back to a festival that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with sacrifice, lust, and fertility rites. And if we go even further back, beyond the days of Rome, we might find that the roots of this celebration run much deeper than we think, echoing traditions from ancient civilizations that shaped the world in ways we still don't fully understand. Now, don't get me wrong, I didn't want to ruin anyone's Valentine's Day. That's why I decided to make this an After Valentine's episode. Let's ease back into reality now that the chocolates are half price and the flower bouquets are starting to wilt. But here's the real question. Is Valentine's Day truly about love, or is it a cleverly disguised relic of something much older and much darker? Let's unravel the origins of Saint Valentine's Day, what we have been told, what was hidden, and whether this holiday is truly about love or something else entirely. Welcome back to the LilWeird podcast. I'm your host, Jane, and I hope you all had a wonderful or at least interesting Valentine's Day. Whether you spent it with a special someone, your friends, or just a good book and snacks, I hope it was exactly what you wanted. So tell me, how was your Valentine's? Were you one of those people receiving flowers and chocolates? Or maybe you were the one buying last-minute gifts in panic? Or perhaps you completely ignored the day and just waited for the discounts on February 14th or 15th. For me, Valentine's Day always reminds me of my college days. See, in my university, Valentine's Day was bigger than intramurals. It wasn't just couples celebrating, it was friends pranking each other. Random serenades in the middle of class, and school organizations turning love and laughter into business. You could literally pay a student or to deliver a flower, a song, or even an embarrassing on-the-spot performance to your friend. And trust me, people did not hold back. Professors getting love songs sung to them, students running away in embarrassment, friends secretly sending fake confessions. It was fun, romantic for some, and most definitely profitable. But here's something to think about. Why is Valentine's Day the most popular Saint's Day in the Philippines? I mean, when we think of Saint's Day, most of them just pass by without much recognition. But Valentine's, it's celebrated like a major event. Other than, of course, classes are not suspended. Other than All Saints Day, which, let's be honest, we don't really celebrate for the saints, but as an extension of All Souls Day to honor the dead, no other Saints Day gets this much attention. So why does Saint Valentine's Day stand out? Is it really because of Saint Valentine, or is there something much older behind it? That's what we're going to uncover today, starting with what most people know about Valentine's Day, before peeling back the layers of history to see where it really began. Let's start the story most of us grew up with, the legend of Saint Valentine. Alright, let's start with the version of Valentine's Day that most people know, the story of Saint Valentine. If you ask around, most people will say Valentine's Day is about a kind-hearted saint who secretly helped lovers, defied an emperor, and died for love. It sounds like something straight out of a romance novel, but what's the actual story? The truth is, there wasn't just one Saint Valentine. The Catholic Church actually recognizes at least three different Saint Valentines, all of whom were martyred, which isn't exactly romantic. One legend says that Saint Valentine was a priest in Rome during the reign of Emperor Claudius II in the 3rd century. The story goes that Claudius outlawed marriages for young men, believing that single men made better soldiers. Valentine, however, continued to perform marriages in secret for young lovers. Another version claims that Saint Valentine was imprisoned for helping persecuted Christians. While in prison, he supposedly healed the jailer's blind daughter, and before his execution, he left her a note signed "From your Valentine," which, if true, would make that the first ever Valentine's message. The third version tells of a Bishop Valentine of Tournai who was also martyred for his faith. Some historians believe this Valentine and the Roman priest Valentine might actually be the same person, just with different parts of the story told over time. Here's where things get interesting. Valentine, or at least one of them, was supposedly executed on February 14 around 270 AD. That's why Pope Gelasius I later declared February 14 as St. Valentine's Day in 496 AD. But here's the thing, many early Christian martyrs had feast days. So why did St. Valentine's Day become this huge celebration of romantic love? Why not any of the other martyrs? Well, that's where history gets murky. Because this wasn't just about a saint. The timing of Valentine's Day suggests that something else, something much older, was already being celebrated in mid-February. And that's where we meet Lupercalia, a festival filled with wild rituals, sacrifices, and a celebration that had nothing to do with Saint Valentine, but everything to do with fertility, lust, and ancient cats. Alright, so we've talked about Saint Valentine and how February 14 became his feast day. But here's where things take an interesting turn. Because while the holiday might be named after a saint, its traditions, they didn't exactly start. Before Saint Valentine was even a thought, the Romans were already celebrating something else around this time of year. It was called Lupercalia. And let's just say, it was nothing like the Valentine's Day we know today. Lupercalia was held every year from February 13 to 15, and it was all about purification, fertility, and ensuring good fortune. But the way they went about it, a little unconventional. So here's how it started. The festival took place at the Lupercal cave, which according to legend, was where Romulus and Remus, the twin brothers who founded Rome, were nursed by a she-wolf. To honor that story, the festival began with sacrificed goats and dogs were offered by Roman priests called the Luperci. Then things got a little more hands-on. The priests would smear the fresh blood onto their foreheads, wipe it off with milk, and then run through the streets of Rome. But they weren't just running for fun. They were carrying strips of goat skin, and here's the part that might surprise you. Women actually line up to be playfully whipped with it. Now, before you start picturing something violent, this wasn't about punishment. Women believed that being touched by these goat hide strips would bring them good fortune and boost their fertility. It was more of a symbolic blessing than anything else. And if that wasn't interesting enough, Lupercalia also had a unique matchmaking tradition. Young men would draw the names of women from a jar, and the two would be paired up for the festival. Sometimes it was just for fun, but other times, these matches actually led to marriage. Now, this was one of the most popular festivals in Rome. People loved it, so much so that even after Rome officially became Christian, they kept celebrating it. The church wasn't exactly thrilled about it though. See, Lupercalia didn't quite fit into Christian teachings, so the church had two choices: ban it completely or repurpose it into something more acceptable. And that's exactly what happened. In 496 AD, Pope Gelasius I officially declared February 14 as St. Valentine's Day, slowly replacing the old traditions with new ones that focus more on love and devotion. Over time, the rituals of Lupercalia faded away and St. Valentine took the spotlight. But here's where things get really interesting. Some historians believe that Lupercalia itself might have been influenced by an even older tradition, one that didn't begin in Rome at all, but in an ancient civilization much further back in history. A civilization where a mighty ruler built an empire and may have shaped traditions that still echo in our modern world. But we'll get to that next. So, we've talked about the Lupercalia, the bloody frenzied festival that somehow got rebranded into Valentine's Day, but let's go even deeper into the rabbit hole. Some researchers and alternative historians claim that the origins of this festival may even be older, tracing back to a controversial, almost mythical figure, a mighty hunter, a king, a god to some, Nimrod. Now, let me be clear. What we're about to discuss is debated, controversial, and far from being accepted history. But it's fascinating nonetheless. Some believe that Lupercalia and even the way we portray Cupid might have a surprising ties to Nimrod, the ancient king of Babylon. But who is Nimrod and why is he linked to Valentine's Day? Nimrod is a character straight out of the book of Genesis. He's described as a mighty hunter before the Lord. Genesis chapter 10 verse 9. Some interpretations suggest that that phrase doesn't mean he was a heroic figure. It might actually mean he was a rebel defying God. Nimrod is often credited with founding Babylon and the Tower of Babel, an attempt to reach the heavens, which of course didn't end well. But over time, different cultures gave him many names: Baal, Marduk, Osiris, and even Saturn in later Roman traditions. So, what does this have to do with Cupid, the chubby little winged baby shooting arrows? Most of us picture Cupid as this adorable, mischievous cherub who makes people fall in love, but in older myths, Cupid wasn't always so innocent. His Greek equivalent was Eros, a powerful god of desire who could overwhelm people with uncontrollable passion. But here's where things get weird. Some accounts claim that Cupid is actually a symbolic representation of Nimrod himself. According to some interpretations, Nimrod was so revered that his mother, Semiramis, deified him after his death. In some legends, she even married her own son, claiming he was reborn as a god. And guess what? The word Cupid actually means desire. Some sources claim that when Semiramis saw her son, she desired him. This disturbing connection is why some conspiracy theories say Cupid is not just a cute love angel, but a remnant of an ancient fertility cult. It gets even stranger. Some believe that when Nimrod died, his body was chopped into pieces, scattered across different territories. His missing body part, well, let's just say his reproductive organ, was never found. Some claim it was later symbolized as an obelisk, like the one in Washington, D.C. or in the Vatican's own St. Peter's Square. That's why the heart shape, the universal symbol of Valentine's Day, was never originally based on human heart, but on ancient fertility symbols. Of course, these theories aren't part of mainstream history, and whether Nimrod's influence truly stretches into the traditions we see today is still up for debate. But here's what we do know. Throughout history, belief systems have a way of adapting, absorbing, and repackaging older traditions, whether intentionally or through cultural evolution. So while we've looked at how ancient kings, fertility cults, and Roman festivals might have shaped what we now call Valentine's Day, there's still another layer to uncover. One that doesn't come from the rulers or the pagans, but from a group within early Christianity itself. A group that sought hidden knowledge, spiritual unions, and a mystical understanding of love. Before the church fully established its controls, before it decided which traditions to keep and which ones to erase, there was a different kind of Christianity, one that merged faith with ancient wisdom, secrecy, and sometimes controversial rituals. And at the center of it was a movement named after a man, Valentinus. Could it be that Valentine's Day, despite its mainstream Christian identity, still carries echoes of these hidden teachings? Let's find out. So, we've gone from Saint Valentine to Lupercalia and even further back to Nimrod. But there's still another fascinating layer to this story, one that involves early Christian mystics, secret teachings, and a movement that the church later tried to erase. I'm talking about the Gnostics, a group of early Christians who had a very different interpretation of faith, one that blended elements of philosophy, mysticism, and in some cases, even the pagan traditions of fertility cults. So, who are the Gnostics? The word gnosis means knowledge, and for Gnostics, the goal was to gain hidden spiritual knowledge that they believed would lead to enlightenment and salvation. But their version of Christianity looked very different from what we know today. While mainstream Christianity focused on faith and doctrine, the Gnostics believed in mystical experiences, sacred unions, and rituals that sometimes involve sexual symbolism. Some even claim that the physical world was created by an imperfect God, and that true salvation could only be found through esoteric wisdom. And this is where things take an unexpected turn. Because some historians suggest that Gnostic sects, especially the followers of a teacher named Valentinus, may have played a role in reshaping Lupercalia into something resembling what we now call Valentine's Day. One of the most well-known Gnostic sects was led by Valentinus, a 2nd century Christian mystic. His followers, known as the Valentinians, had their own mystical interpretation of love and spiritual union. And according to some sources, the rituals may have included elements of the ancient fertility traditions from Lupercalia. One of their most controversial rituals was called the Sacrament of Copulation, which, as you can probably guess, wasn't your typical church service. This ritual was said to involve a symbolic, or sometimes literal, reenactment of divine union between the male and female principles. The participants would invoke a sacred blessing, saying, "Let the seed of light descend into thy bridal chamber, receive the bridegroom, open thine arms to embrace him, behold grace has descended upon thee." Now, whether this was purely symbolic or involved physical acts is still debated. But what's certain is that the Valentinians placed a strong emphasis on love, spiritual union, and the merging of the divine masculine and feminine. And when the Catholic Church later tried to suppress Gnostic beliefs, they replaced these ideas with something more acceptable. By the 4th and 5th centuries, the Orthodox Church had deemed the Gnostics heretical. Many of their texts were burned, and their followers were forced to either abandon their beliefs or keep them in secret. But some scholars believe that instead of erasing Gnostic ideas entirely, the Church absorbed and repackaged them into safer, Christian-friendly traditions. This might explain why Valentine's Day became associated with love, unions, and devotion, not just in religious sense, but in a way that echoed ancient fertility rites. It's as if the church allowed a version of these old beliefs to survive, just as stripped of their more mystical or controversial aspects. So, was Valentine's Day shaped by the Gnostic Valentinians, who blended ancient traditions with mystical Christianity? Did their interpretation of spiritual love and divine unions influence how we see Romans today? Or was it just a coincidence that the date named after Saint Valentine shares some echoes of these secret rituals? Again, we may never know for sure, but one thing is clear: Valentine's Day, as we know it, is more than just chocolates and roses. So, we've gone through the layers of history: Saint Valentine, Lupercalia, ancient rulers, and even the influence of mystical Gnostic traditions. But now, let's bring it all back to the present. How did Valentine's Day go from sacrifices and fertility rites to what it is today? A global celebration of love, romance, and let's be real, consumerism. By the Middle Ages, thanks to the influence of poets like Geoffrey Chaucer, the idea of February 14 being a day of romance started catching on. Then came Shakespeare, who helped romanticize the legend of Saint Valentine even further. By the Victorian era, the exchange of handwritten love letters became popular, and eventually companies saw an opportunity. Fast forward to the 20th century, enter Hallmark, chocolate companies, and florists. Valentine's Day became less about history and more about flowers, chocolates, and grand romantic gestures. And today, well, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. Now, does that mean that we shouldn't celebrate it? Not necessarily, but it's fascinating how a holiday with such deep, strange, and complex origins has become so universally accepted as a simple day of love. And that leads us to our final part, the conclusion. After everything we've uncovered, what's the real takeaway from all of this? Let's talk about that. We started this journey with a simple question: what are the origins of the Valentine's Day? And well, turns out the answer is anything but simple. We've uncovered a tangled web of ancient Roman festivals, Christian martyrs, Babylonian rulers, mystical traditions, and a whole lot of rebranding. Is Valentine's Day truly about Saint Valentine? Or is it a sanitized version of a wilder, more ancient celebration of fertility, power, and control? Now, of course, it's important to say these are all theories. Some of what we discuss today is historically verified, while other parts come from interpretations, religious traditions, and speculative research. That's the thing about history. Sometimes what we know is the surface layer, and beneath it lies a world of forgotten stories, lost texts, and hidden meanings. But here at LilWeird, that's exactly what we love to do. Dig into the strange, the bizarre, the what ifs of history and culture. And at the end of the day, it's not about blindly believing any theory. It's about questioning. It's about looking at the things we take for granted and asking, where did this really come from? So whether you see Valentine's Day as a sweet celebration of love, a cleverly disguised ancient ritual, or just a good excuse to eat chocolates, you do you. But if there's one takeaway from this episode, it's this. Always stay curious, always ask questions, because sometimes the real story is much weirder than we ever imagined. And that's it for today's episode of LilWeird Podcast. We've gone from Saint Valentine to Lupercalia, from Babylonian kings to winged Cupids, and honestly, history is always so much messier and weirder than it seems on the surface. Before we go back to enjoying discounted chocolates and post-Valentine sales, let's keep the conversation going. What do you think about these theories? Do you see connections? Or is this just another case of history twisting itself over time? Hit me up on Instagram at LilWeird Podcast or wherever you like to chat about the weird and bizarre. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow, share, or leave a rating. It really helps LilWeird grow and reach more curious minds like yours. And as always, stay curious, stay weird, and never stop questioning the stories you think you know. Thanks for listening.